I got you.
Thank you. I think I'm signing in with the wrong account.
I hate when that happens.
Yeah. All right. Sorry about that. Welcome everybody. It is February 1st, 2022. This is the bi-weekly Cloud Custodian community meeting. I'll be your host today, George. Please be aware that the CNCF code of conduct is in effect, so please be excellent to each other. And as always, we'll be recording and putting the video up on YouTube as well as publishing all the notes and whatnot to the usual Google group. Um, Before we get started, anyone want to introduce themselves? If it's your first meeting or if you haven't been in a while, if you want to say hello, let us know where you're from. Anyone want to say hi? All right. It looks like everybody knows each other already and everyone is best friends. So let's get started. Normally we have an agenda. We don't have any workshops dates nailed down for the next month, but as soon as we do, Umair will be the first to let us know. Um, and we're kind of in the doldrums of conference season here, so not much to report on the way of events. So we're going to get started with just basically what's been happening over the past few weeks in the custodian community. And Jameson, you're up first with this one, adding a filter op logic to IAM role filters.
Yeah, so within AWS space of Custodian, when scanning all roles, we had a use case where we wanted to be able to match on role name patterns. And notice that the current filter for IAM role that's called has specific managed policy just currently takes a string, an exact string. And so open this PR or open this feature request to add the capabilities so you can do like a regex pattern or something like that on the attached policies to a role. So example, checking for all roles that end in the word full access, like the AWS managed full access roles, being able to find if any of those are attached to a role. And so, yeah, I think this is AJ has been working on this one, and I think he's been having some pretty good success so far. So this is looking promising and should be helpful to others, hopefully. Any questions on this one?
So AJ, I just saw you just self-assign this to yourself. Have you been working on this already?
Yeah, and this goes back to I had messed with it a little bit just to see, is this going to be a lot of work or a little bit of work? It seems okay, but I never trust that initial feeling. But yeah, it looks like it's going to be all right. Just mainly don't want to break existing policies, so I just self-assigned, and I'll finish up the work on that.
Cool. Anybody have questions for this one? All right, this one seems relatively straightforward. AJ, you're next with AWS Security Group merge match rules. I believe this was more of a heads up than a.
Yeah, this was one that we just every once in a while we get questions from a couple different places on that all boil down to the same issue. And in this case, it was that when you're looking at a security group and filtering by ingress rules, and there are multiple rules that match your filters, it was only keeping track of the last one. So if you went to go remove rules that were too permissive or something, it was only going to find the last match, and you'd have to run the same filter multiple times before it completely remediated something.
Mm-hmm.
So that was some Gitter troubleshooting and some other folks who were talking to, but it looks like that should be fixed now.
Yeah, congratulations! You were merged 8 minutes ago.
Yay!
All right. Any questions on this one? All right, and I think this is another FYI.
Yeah, and that's just it came out of the same discussions, which was okay, the ingress filter isn't behaving the way that I expect, and also what the heck does match operator do? So so this was just kind of a separate PR just to add something. So we have some examples on what it does, what it can do, what it can't do, when you might want to use it.
Excellent. All right. Anything else to add on these two, or any questions for AJ? All right, Liz, you had a related issue and a PR here. If you want to go over this one, I think this is a fast one.
Yeah, I mean, not necessarily relates specifically to the issue NPR, but more about trying to figure out or addressing kind of like the lack of documentation when it comes to like any process that we might want to establish around contributing, because I want to work on that, or I was going to work on that issue. And then it turned out that someone had been working on it, but like hadn't said anything about it, which is fine, just because that's not clarified anywhere. And then like as soon as I had mentioned something about it, then they're, we're like, oh, I've actually been working on this, which is awesome. But that this is something that I want to address from like a community point of view, just so that we do have like some process around that. So people don't end up doing redundant work. And then this also kind of segues into highlighting or maybe bringing up or surfacing that we do have a label or tag for documentation issues. So if you want to file a ticket or submit an issue, there is a documentation tag, right? There's a label for that, so that we can start working on that in a more like organized fashion. Is basically what this is about.
Awesome.
Quick question. Well, 2 comments. Sounds great to help document like good practices with regards to communicating and claiming an issue, or at least commenting that you want to work on it. That's generally a good practice, regardless of the documentation of that. But you should always be aware that not everyone's going to necessarily do that. Flip side, I don't know if we have a document on the issue template. If we have the ability, if we have our template actually includes one for documentation. Otherwise, as a
that is
someone getting an issue,
That is a good question.
That's a good question.
Otherwise, you can't use that tag per se.
PR template or issue template?
On the issue template.
Issue template.
Issue template, right?
Which it probably doesn't, George, because we just worked on those recently, right?
Well, we have 3: bug report, feature request, and a question. So this would be under what?
Like a
Bug report?
feature? I don't know. This would be something you have to talk about, huh?
Yeah.
I mean, there's this whole issue that all of our whole tag taxonomy could potentially use
Yeah.
some rationale, let's say.
Okay. So
Yeah.
Liz, this is maybe a good action item. We should think about whether it makes sense to look at the issue templates for something like this. Maybe, I don't know if it's like, hey, if you're interested in working this, assign it to yourself maybe, or something like that. I don't know.
Because we do want to revive like the doc sprints. I just wanted to do something a little bit more organized about it. So this would help with that.
And if anyone knows a project or an open source project that they like that has like, wow, those are really nice tags, please let us know, because we could use I think ours are more than a little bit rotted, and always on the lookout for projects that are effectively using tags.
All right. Moving on, Darren asks, hey, how do I get PRs onto this list? You did it right. You can just let me know here. I want to bring these 2 up here. First one's 7026.
Yeah, that one is fairly simple, and I believe people already approve it. So I guess my question is just, what does it take to get it merged?
It's on my backlog. There was 1 or 2 minor things I think around error checking, or like there was like 1 or 2 minor things I was just going to tweak and merge, but I haven't made the time on it. I can probably at least comment on it. What I was looking at specifically, but yes, that's definitely on the merge queue. Things. Merge queue is unfortunately not LIFO. It's closer to FIFO at the moment.
Wait, what about the merge queue?
Sorry, the merge queue is closer to LIFO than FIFO at the moment. as far as whatever's in the top of the list.
And then for the second PR, again, I have a question back for Kapil on his comment, just for clarification. Not sure if you have a chance to take a look.
This is on the config role. I think
Yes, the manage config role.
Yeah, so I think the notion of doing the action on the account is the right thing to do. What I was trying to note is that typically, in general, when we have an action, we also have a corresponding filter so that the policy doesn't find non-compliant resources. With like, if you have an action that you can never detect in the filter, then the policy is always basically reporting something is not compliant. And therefore, to complement that effectively for any action that's going to take action, there should be a corresponding filter that allows you to detect if you need to take an action.
Still not clear on what that means.
So in the context of a managed role, or sorry, on the account resource, it would be a filter that says, hey, is this managed role already enabled in this account environment? And if so, then it will basically filter out the account resource. That way, if you have a policy that's about, hey, I want to make sure that these config roles are enabled, the policy isn't going to actions unless there are managed config roles that are missing in that account.
Okay. Right. So I think it's just a different perspective on how we think it should work then. Because from my perspective, I was thinking, hey, cloud custodians should enforcing, say, this is what I want my managed config rule to looks like. So I will imagine, hey, if it's already enabled, but this is what I'm telling cloud custodian it should be enforcing, I would expect that it should update. But it sounds like you don't think that's how it should be done.
I think it should update the resource. What I'm saying is that whenever we go to take an action, we're typically taking multiple actions. We're potentially doing notifications, we're emitting metrics about the policy. And so the policy should always have a way to detect if it's already in its target state. And if it is through filters, it should always have the ability to detect if it's in its target state. If so, be able to filter out the resources and avoid actions for resources that don't need it.
But you were saying the filter is, hey, we filter it out. If it's already there, then don't do anything.
Yes, if it's already there, then filter out the resource, which is what filters do. And the action's still there.
But this is not more than just. This is more than just. Is it already there? Is it already there and configured to what we want it to do?
Correct. Both things. Like, filtered can exist and configured correctly. The filter should be inclusive of both of those things. Like if we look at security group filter or a IAM check permission filter, it's really about checking to whatever degree the user wants to configure the filter. But the intent is that if the filter doesn't match the resource, then the resource can be considered already in a compliant state. Otherwise, when the policy is going through, we emit a bunch of metrics and outputs from the policy based on what resources match the set of filters. So, the action itself being idempotent is great, but the ability to not even having to execute the actions against the resources which are already compliant is an important part of the custodian philosophy.
Okay, I don't want to take more people time, but let's take a look back at the sample policy that I have in this PR real quick and see what the filter would be like. Are we saying the filter will be the exact thing of what I want the action to do here so that it can check that, hey, is the manage config enable and have these settings? That's a pretty large filter.
That is fairly accurate though. For ideally you'd be able to separate out the configuration to a common block.
Is this more readable?
Yeah, I mean, I see what you're saying. This is a large degree of configuration around it.
This is where YAML anchors can come in handy to duplicate blocks, assuming that they are identical or nearly identical.
Yeah, it looks like they would be almost identical in this case. Yeah, I think that is probably the right answer, though. Like, it would just check to see if you already have this named role with this configuration, then you don't have to execute the action.
Okay, all right. That's good.
All right. Any other questions on this one? Let me size this back down here. All right. Thanks for those, Darren. And before any biweekly, if anyone has a list of PRs that you want to go over, you can always either ping me either via mail or just tossing it in chat when the meeting starts, and then I'll just toss it into the agenda and we'll get to it. All right. With that, we have a few other ones that hit the queue over the past 2 weeks. C7N mailer GCP support.
I took a look at it. It looks like it's got a couple of issues in CI. It looks like it's actually hitting the API live. It's also based on some work that Brent Clements did, I think, when it was at Capital One. I'll leave that part aside and say that the focus. So I might need to touch base with them, but right now it just needs some additional work to actually pass through CI and actually make sure it's doing all recorded tests for the GCP interactions. I think it's got like 3 or 4 failures on CI with regards to unit tests.
Yeah, and I also put it on the list to heads up for all the GCP users that might be interested in watching this. So, all right. Anyone else have comments on this one? I'm just gonna open all 4, Kapil. Stats D metrics. You hinted at this a few weeks ago.
Yeah, it works. I since took a deeper look at OpenTelemetry, and it now has effectively, different degrees of support around the 3 different channels we care about, as far as logs, which are probably alpha, traces, which are probably prod, and metrics, which are also prod. But it's a big package of several megabytes between their dependency stacks, and and it also requires a separate exploiter or daemon to actually do anything with the actual metrics. So I'm looking at whether or not we want to just have a separate package that you can install to have just direct OpenTelemetry support. But if anyone's interested in StatsD, like, this works, and if there's interest, we can merge this independently. It's very lightweight as far as the dependency. It's basically 100 lines of Python code as far as our additional and 0 depths as far as our additional footprint.
Any comments on this one?
And it has support for all 5 different StatsD style tagging between Librado, Databricks, Influx, et cetera, et cetera.
All right. AWS ECS service resize operation. I think this was more of a heads up than a change, right? Trying to remember why we put this one on the list. 1 second.
So the problem with trying to modify an ECS service directly, ECS services are typically governed through autoscale groups. Application autoscaling. And the application autoscaling. There's 2 different parts here. Like, there's the notion that ECS is going to run on some underlying compute data structure. And that underlying compute data structure is either a regular EC2 instance, more commonly an autoscale group, or increasingly more commonly some sort of a Fargate cluster. The Fargate cluster represents infinite capacity, and effectively scaling down the ECS service directly scales down to compute. On the autoscaling groups in EC2, that's less clear. But the other part of it is application autoscaling. So if we if application auto-scaling is managing the service cardinality count with regard to units, then simply modifying it directly, you get effectively what I call dueling control loops, where each of them is trying to twist the knobs, and they're trying to do very counterproductive behaviors. There is a notion that we could detect if this was a target for an auto-scale lifecycle, but TLDR is that this probably needs some, to be general purpose, this probably needs a clear consideration of that other control loop, potentially a filter around making sure that application auto-scaling is not enabled in the service. Because if it is, we have a separate resize operation for application auto-scaling, which was what would be preferred to use in that context if it is being managed through that.
Okay. Any comments on this one? Yeah, put that one on there just so we can get a more detailed explanation on how they ended up that way. This next one is the second GCP one, Cloud Asset Inventory Execution Mode.
Yeah, so we already have support for a source for Cloud Asset Inventory. For those not familiar, Cloud Asset Inventory is, if you're coming in from AWS land, is effectively like AWS config, or in different contexts from Azure Resource Graph, and it does support event-based notifications around resource changes. So the effective healing of a resource like this would be an AWS config rule. It's a little different in the sense that the notification wouldn't necessarily allow us to filter based on resource type. So there's some a little bit work to be done there. There's some additional work around Cloud Asset Inventory in the PR, in an extent PR around GCP folder scaling that would ideally be merged prior to working on this.
Okay. And then the one you've been waiting to talk about. How's the experimental cloud control provider coming?
We have traded documented inconsistencies for undocumented inconsistencies, the illusion of consistency. I'm going to actually pass the mic to AJ, since I think he's actually kicked the tires on it.
Yeah, and actually, AJ, if you
Or Pratish, I think Pratish was also mentioning that he wanted to kick the tires, so I'll let both of them chime in on what they thought.
Yep.
Sure,
and AJ,
George.
if you could give us all just a 30-second summary here, because I know this one's been going on over multiple meetings.
Sure. So the promise of the cloud control provider and the cloud control API is that AWS, with its history of incredibly inconsistent APIs across services, we can instead use this cloud control API, and there will be some probably reduced set of actions, but it'll be consistent across services. It sounds like there will be unicorns and hugs, and everything will be really fun. There should be, it's CRUD-L sort of operation, so you'll be able to create, read, update, delete, and list. That's the hope. That's the promise. The first thing that I wanted to try with it was looking at WAF v2, the second revision of the web application firewall, because we've gotten some community requests for that, and we don't have any existing support for it. So it seemed like if we can cover that through Cloud Control API, it's kind of a double win. But when I tried to do just the most, like a basic list policy, it came back that it didn't have enough information to do that. And that's because you can't just say, show me all web ACLs for the WAF v2 resource. It needs to know, like, what type of web ACL are you looking at? Are you looking at a regional one, or are you looking at a CloudFront one? And so the fact that it needs to know that additional information, like, it's not hard to give it, but as far as looking at this schema for that resource and knowing the information that you have to provide, and then having some sense of defaults that we can define in Custodian for that was a little bit unclear to me. And from talking it over with Kapil, it sounded like that is unclear in general. So I don't know if someone else has worked with this much. I have only worked with it as far as I've commented there.
I mean, I think the challenge there is that there's no way to infer these additional parameters. So it's effectively a consistent API with inconsistent parameters, which makes it inconsistent as a whole. There is a separate, we currently expose more resources, I think, in that provider than I've done verification. There's probably about 30 resources that need to be trimmed just on the basis of what, in some cases, not all resources support not all cloud control resources support the list operation just based on the underlying provider implementation not having implemented it. So those still need to be trimmed as well. But I think you're, in this context, exposing an additional case where they purport to support it, but they need additional parameters that are not documented.
So would you think we would just, if we were going to support something like, if we were going to say that this provider fully supported WAF v2, would we just need to log at the resource definition that, you know, it needs this, and we would hand edit that in?
Yeah, I think we would hand edit the JSON, but we would have to do that in a way that the thing that's automatically downloading and updating them is respectful of the hand annotations.
Like a set of local overrides or something that we can just patch onto anything.
Yeah, effectively a set of local overrides in that context. And then additionally, the thing that was trimming it was particularly looking for trimming the full resource model set of the few hundred resources that are there. Was only doing those that's the type provider said, hey, I don't support this. So there would still be this context of, we should probably split that list and actually, or put a GIST up and attach to this PR of those two sets. Like, these are the ones that say that this implementation doesn't support it, and then these are the ones that say they do support it, but it doesn't work for whatever reason, and we just triage that list. The other thing with the not supported list is obviously that list will change over time, so will need to be revalidated periodically. But I mean, I'm still hopeful this will gain us a good amount of support. I think it is mostly, as far as what works well, it's mostly things that are on the long tail, and like a lot of the common types like SNS, SQS, EC2 don't work, but some esoteric things like Nimble Studio do work. So and some that bridge the two, like Lambda as well.
You mentioned someone else was looking at this?
Pratish.
Yeah, I did some testing with ECS services and ECS container instances. I found that the responses for both the services were not consistent. The only other thing I wanted to test was, does it work with Lambda? Because we have a call with AWS lined up where they want to talk about these APIs, and I wanted to make sure I call those inconsistencies on that call. So I was trying to test it with Lambda, but I didn't get that far yet. I'm trying to.
Yeah, Lambda works. I think the underlying issue with using this versus going direct is that you don't know. Some of these providers are potentially doing a lot of API calls. That was another thing. Is in some cases the list operation was enough. In some cases we had to do both the list operation as well as the get on every resource.
Yep.
And
Yep.
It's pretty all over the place as far as the consistency aspect there, which makes it useful for those long tail resources of low cardinality, but for any high volume resource, this will probably put more strain on your account than using the native provider and custodian.
Yeah, with ECS, I found the tags were not coming back, so it was kind of strange because it comes back for other services.
Was it bringing all the other attributes that you'd expect other than the tags?
Not everything, but it
Okay.
had it had few of them. Yeah.
Okay, cool.
All right. Anything else on this one? Look at this, Kapil. You're just plugging away at it.
That was a few weeks ago. They've moved on.
All right, and that comes to the end of all the PRs and stuff that we had lined up. Does anybody have anything else or any issue? Open call for anything. PRs, issues. Anyone run into?
I mean, I have lots of issues, but not ones that we can solve
Yeah.
here. I don't think.
All right. With that, we'll give everybody 25 minutes back. Thank you so much for coming. Good turnout today. So glad to see that you're all enjoying this. If you have any feedback for the meeting, feel free to reach out to me. Always trying to make this meeting as useful for you as we can. And with that, thank you. Happy Tuesday, everyone. And we'll see everyone in 2 weeks.
Thank you.
Thanks, everybody.
Thanks, everyone.
Take care.
Cheers.